It's another film study. We're going to look back at this game this past weekend, another ho-hum win for the Baltimore Ravens. This is the offensive episode, and there's a whole lot of complaining going on Twitter and online and on the radio right now about the offense, so it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. Ken McKusick, how you doing?
Life's good, Josh. How about you?
I am doing good. I told you guys I was flying to Indianapolis. Maybe I said it after the show, but flew to Indianapolis. Learned today that it doesn't matter if there's a coronavirus going on. They will still cram as many people as possible on an airplane.
What about the empty middle seats? Aren't you on a Southwest route?
That's what I expected. I flew American.
Oh, big mistake.
And, I didn't have a choice. It's what they gave me. But I flew 2 flights because I had a layover, and they were the fullest flights I've been in many years.
Mm-hmm.
I flew Spirit to Baltimore a month ago and had 3-4 rows to myself. So I recommend Spirit.
And still had no legroom because it was Spirit.
You should have seen my legroom in American today. Spirit was better.
Now, Josh is 6'4". I'm also tall, but not as tall, and I demand the lengthy legroom when I fly over 3 hours.
Mail your luggage on Spirit.
Right.
If you've got multiple people with you, send it in the mail.
Well, that's the key. I never check luggage unless I'm gone for like 2 weeks.
No, in Spirit, you can't. Even if you check the luggage, you take it on board, you pay a $50 fee. Right. So it's an absurd a la carte airline.
I use Spirit for weekends when I just take a backpack.
Okay.
That's what I do. That's where Spirit's great for me, and flights under 2 hours.
Yep.
Because I will say Spirit did downgrade the seats to like these metal, like military seats. I've never seen anything like it. Like, I think they had something, and it was just like stainless steel seats when I flew Spirit. I've never seen that before.
Are you sure you didn't take a hop? Were you like in the back of like a C-130 or something?
No, it's something that they did. It's how Spirit adjusted to COVID. And it's these metal seats and real short trays that they can just spray down immediately.
Okay. So there's actually a reason for it.
There's a reason for it.
Still is not comfortable, but yeah.
Oh, it's worse than Spirit used to be, but they've got a reason. Meanwhile, American is exactly the same as it's always been, and they don't care. But let's talk football. So we got Michael Crawford. We didn't even introduce him.
And he's already talking.
He's already jumping in, which means it's going to be a fun, long episode. So it doesn't matter whether the Ravens defense looks good or not. We're going to talk about it. So, Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing well, guys. I'm doing well. As you can probably hear, I'm, right in mid-season form already on the podcast. So it's good to join you guys again. And hey, we got a 4-1 team to talk about here. So I'm going to stay in that frame of mind.
All right. Well, how did you go into this game? Like, what were your expectations going in after the Chiefs and the Washington football team? And then how were you set up and ready for the Bengals?
Well, I always work myself up into this frenzy, no matter who they play, where I find all these ways that they can lose. And my wife always says I'm not a real fan because that's all I do is find ways that teams are going to beat them. But in my heart of hearts, I really expected them to blow the Bengals out. And that's what they did. So they met my expectations, exceeded them in a lot of ways on defense.
We have a lot of military listeners, and what your stance is towards a game is mine as well. It's called being a helicopter pilot. Not too much different from being a helicopter parent, but helicopter pilots try and figure out what's going to go wrong, not figure out how can they, make things right or go on the fly, because they need to figure out beforehand a lot of times, and obviously dangerous profession there. But that's what you're doing. You're planning ahead for what could go wrong, and I feel the same way. Until they go up by 2 scores, I'm not really comfortable ever.
I'm the same. So that happened relatively early in the Bengals game. So I got comfortable pretty quickly. And it was just one of those games where when you go in and there's obviously a difference between talking about what you see on paper, right? You can look at statistics and you look at how teams are playing coming in, but it's a division game, number one. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes what you've done before isn't as relevant when division opponents get together. And then you just, to your point, you just don't know until they kick the ball off, right? You can have this great game plan. You can appear to be the more dominant team in all these different ways. But until you kick that ball off and they start playing, you just don't really know. But then once they did kick the ball off, the dominant team looked like the dominant team, especially on defense.
And especially for the first half in particular, when they really laid it to them pretty good. Let's talk to the elephant in the room right away. Is there anything you're really concerned about with Lamar at this point?
I'm not, and I was trying to think about another word to use that could express maybe worrying about a couple of things, but I felt like concern was too strong because I think when I watch, what I see is here's what I do. I try to compartmentalize it, right? I try not to form opinions that cross games. I look at a game and I say, this is how he played in this game. Here are the individual plays in this game that were either good plays or not so good plays. Mm-hmm. And then I try to just, keep it in that box. And then going on to the next game, what I might do is say, well, for the plays that were in that not so good category, here are the things I would like to see that would show me that there's some improvement taking place. If I see those things, then I'll feel a little better about those things. But I try to isolate it to individual games. So it's hard to have like an overarching concern when you do that.
All right. Well, are other words maybe anxiety, worry, disquiet, apprehension, unease, perturbation, consternation, distress, or agitation? Would any of those work?
There's a lot in there. Probably could find one or two in there that would work, but I also try to keep the perspective. And I know I'm not the first person to say it. You hear it from announcers, you hear it from the coaching staff and other people. Hey, this was basically like their fourth preseason game or whatever everybody's saying. But you look back at the off season, the shortened off season, and would they have like 17 practices, padded practices, something like that. So you look at how condensed that was compared to a normal off season. And what I'm about to say, this is no knock on Lamar. People might take it this way, but I remember Willie Snead saying this about him in 2018. He's the more he's able to practice, the more reps he's able to get, the better he gets. He's like, look, he picks things up extremely fast, but he needs those reps. So I kind of look at all of that and say he, along with everybody else, I mean, he's in the same boat. This isn't unique to him. Him, along with everybody else, hasn't had that same number of repetitions and practices that they normally would going into a season. Does it affect him more as a quarterback? Maybe. I don't know. But I try to keep that perspective in mind.
Yeah, I'm looking at the various things, and there are some very good components of Lamar's play that I think are subject to not being concerning. And one of them is that he's still getting over 3 seconds time to throw, not from his offensive line, but from his own legs and his ability to move the pocket, move around, and try and create a throw. Unfortunately, a lot in the Cincinnati game was trying to move around behind the line of scrimmage, trying to find a place where he could safely throw the ball away. Avoiding the official on that one play, running away to the sideline so he can finally get the arm strength ready, the angle ready to hit it to the sideline. It's not like he had zero throws with his legs in this game, but it wasn't many. And I guess the more concerning thing is the inaccuracy. And why don't we come back to Lamar a little later, because I've got a little more drill down detail there that I want to get to. But I probably am a little concerned at this point. And yet, we got a quarterback who's got 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Sign me up for any multiple of that for the whole season. We got a quarterback with a rating of over 100. I really have to ask myself if that's high enough for Lamar now, today, after what we know about his 2019 season. But if you'd asked me at the end of 2018, I'd have signed up for it. I guarantee you that.
Yeah.
So anyway, we are where we are. Let's talk offensive line for a little bit. I want to go through and kind of drop down into the grading a little bit, and we can talk individually about the players as we kind of rip through this. So I'll toss out my grading first, and we'll talk about anything you saw, whatever you like after that, Michael. So
Okay.
We'll start with Ronnie Stanley. He played the entire game. Actually missed, I think, the last kneel down snap. I noticed that he had 1 snap less, but it wasn't during the regular game, so it had to be the kneel down. Missed 4 blocks, 1 quarterback hit, half a sack that I had him share with Brown on the other side, and worked out to be a B after adjustment, right in the middle of the range, so it's not a low B or anything. 6 blocks in level 2. And, there's 2 things about Ronnie that came from this game. One is that he does not seem to be hampered in terms of his ability to get downfield. And particularly on the Duvernay play, he was way downfield, made a very late, possibly in the back block on Lawson that was highly ill-advised, by the way. It was one of these ones where you're knocking down a bunch of bowling pins. You don't know what might go wrong. And we had players in that 10-pin array there that might have been knocked down. And the other is that he did not seem to be setting squarely in pass blocking, despite the fact it didn't all go wrong. It didn't all go to hell in this game. But it concerns me a little bit that maybe the shoulder is still not right.
Yeah, it could possibly be that shoulder. I don't know. You might know. I don't know what the specific shoulder injury was. It was AC joint or something like that. And obviously, in a week's time, it's not going to be fully healed. So it could certainly be a factor. The other thing that crossed my mind, and I guess we'll see if there's anything to this theory or not, is a matchup with a guy like Lawson, who's a really explosive guy coming off the edge. I mean, I wouldn't categorize him as like a really super sort of bendy, type of edge rusher, even though I think he can turn the quarter pretty well. But just a guy who really gets off the ball, who's got good burst. He can do speed to power. He can kind of work an inside move. So I wonder sometimes when you get a guy like that, if you're like, man, I got to really get out here because this guy is really coming. And so I wonder if maybe that was a little bit of it. But I guess we'll have to see him against another, edge rusher in that similar style to see if we continue to see that same sort of thing. Won't prove anything for sure because it could still be the shoulder, but it gives you something to think about.
In 2019, Ronnie obviously had his best year, but he also faced a lot of different edge rushers, obviously in a full season of work, and didn't allow any significant pressures to any of the meaning it didn't allow quarterback hits and sacks to any great degree. So the point I'm making here is that he's always been good about sacrificing ground in the pocket to not allow quarterback hits and sacks, which means I think he gives up a lot of pressures between 2.5 and 3 seconds because my number differs tremendously from PFF from last year. And so I think that's a good thing for a quarterback like Mar, who has proved extremely adept at moving around in the pocket, moving up, moving right in the pocket, which is the natural direction you want to move anyway. In some cases, spinning, pirouetting, and moving left past the pass rusher. Anyway, what I'm concerned about is that if he doesn't have the squareness to deal with that in terms of the strength in both arms, he has to favor one with his feet, that we somehow are seeing a different Ronnie Stanley. We'll wait another game. It's not like this was a bad game, middle of the B range. That's fine. If he did that every week, I'd be perfectly happy. But it did not seem like everything was right to me in this game.
No, and it's kind of a microcosm of what we were talking about earlier. The standards were set so high,
yes,
with so many guys in 2019. Anything that falls below that, it makes you concerned a little bit, and all those other words that you mentioned.
I did have to use a thesaurus. I didn't come up with those personally, but you probably knew that. 6 blocks in level 2 for Ronnie Stanley. He made 2 of his 3 pulls, and actually he really probably made 0 of his 3 pulls, or maybe touched 1 on a third, but they were all 3 of those counter plays. Really pretty cool to see that all in one game. And I know you've done some work with counter and had that good presentation at the analytics event last summer. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it brought back good memories.
There you go.
Counter plays.
Let me move on. Bozeman had a couple of not at the top of his game weeks in a row after having a lot of consecutive Bs, as I graded it. Just been remarkably consistent, but he got back to the B level again in this game. 7 missed blocks was a little bit high. He gave up 2 pressures in this game, so those were his only negative events for the game. 10 of 13 on pulls. That is a day of work and in only 61 snaps. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, when you're in a Greg Roman offense, particularly in the run game, you're going to see a lot of power. And as you've mentioned before, the Ravens are sort of a right-hand dominant run team. So you're going to see a lot of your left guard pulling to the right side. And we saw a lot of that against the Bengals. And to hear that he connected on 10 of 13 of those is really impressive. Not surprised to hear that maybe he struggled in the missed block category a little bit because there's some good interior guys there. I mean, DJ Reader Christian Covington is no slouch. And then Geno Atkins, I didn't chart it. It seemed like he played more pass snaps than run snaps. Maybe exclusively pass snaps. I don't know I don't know exactly, but obviously we know what he's capable of. So that's a tough day's work in the interior of the O-line. So credit to Bozeman for playing as well as he did against that crew.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think he did play exclusively pass snaps. I see the total is only 19, so that really tells you he was probably in a really specific sub package that they wanted to try and minimize his usage. Anyway, I think we're at a point right now where Bozeman is right there with the claim for the most consistent Ravens lineman. Stanley's been hurt once, so that he maybe can't get it. Brown's been up and down a little bit, but he played great at left tackle, and at right tackle he's been all over the board in terms of his grades, but generally okay. Bozeman is the guy who's been fairly consistent through all of this for just about the last year, because it was week 6 of 2019 was really his last bad game. So week 7 and on, he's been pretty. He hasn't had a really fall off the table game anyway during the regular season.
No, and in this election season, I would approve that message.
All right, good job. We'd like to allow all the people who want to pay for election advertising out there to know that we're happy to approve such messages or do readers for your. I'll probably not do readers for your candidate. Let's move on. We'll go on to Matt Skura. Matt Skura now has put together 4 consecutive really good grades, and I score the game, and then I decided I wanted to look at the PFF grade and see what it was like. They did not score him nearly as well in pass blocking, where I only had him for 1 pressure. I suspect what that is, if you've got the PFF subscription. I'm not going to tell you what the grade is, but I suspect it is inaccurate shotgun snaps that they've graded him down for. And they put that in the pass blocking. That's come up specifically for Skura before, because obviously no other line position really has that come up. But that will be the case. I've got a question in to see if that might be it, and hopefully they'll give me the answer on that. But a good game for Skura. Bottom end of the A range, 3 blocks in level 2. The block that really set Skura aside, and the one that belongs on his Show Your Grandchildren tape, is the one on Duvernay's initial play. Wonderful kind of leisurely sneak opposite the pull to get out onto the left side, the left seam, we'll call it, and then made a great block of Lawson, who actually was pretty quick to figure out what was going on and seal him to the inside just long enough. And it was probably a couple seconds before Lawson could get off him, and then he was way too late to catch Duvernay down the sideline.
Yeah, I know that he's still recovering. Obviously, we know about the injury he had last year, a very significant knee injury. But one of the things that I look for, and I mean, I guess you could look for a number of things to see kind of how a guy is recovering now that he's back in game situations and how he's holding up. You could look at how he anchors, against bull rush. That's one thing to look at. I like to look at how he moves on those kinds of plays. So like the one that you just mentioned. And then I started, against my better judgment, I started charting the run game again this weekend. And so I actually charted the Bengals game. I know. It's a tisk situation.
What does your wife have to say about that? I mean, do you need to have another conversation with her? Stay healthy. Do the show. Live your life.
Listen, she doesn't know that this has happened. Let's just keep this between the 3 of us and the millions of listeners out there.
There you go.
Please don't tell her about this. But anyway, so I don't have the specific number in front of me because I don't have the sheet up, but they ran some outside zone like they do in every game pretty much. But I think they ran, a fair amount of it in this particular game. And so that center's block on outside zone, having to get up to level 2, if he can, if he's not covered, if he's uncovered, and to try to cut off a linebacker, right? That angle that you have to take, it's almost like a 45-degree angle. Sometimes it's probably a sharper angle. And you have to go to where you think he's going to be, not where he's at, to cut him off, to either seal him or just keep running him by so the running back can kind of cut off you. That's a tough block to make for any center, particularly one who maybe doesn't have his full mobility back. And I think he was able to pull off some of those. I won't say that it was perfect in every one of those situations, but there's progress there, in my opinion. So I was happy to see that.
Yeah, I do not have it right in front of me in terms of the 4 missed blocks to look it up. I actually do have it, but it would take me a moment to see whether they were L2NB or they were losses at the line of scrimmage. But that's always a concern I have, so I'll be looking at that when it happened. It definitely wasn't all that. He was pancaked. He was pancaked in level 2. Anyway, that's enough for right now. So anyway, I'll have the rest of that in the article. He did make 1 of 1 pulls. He made 1 to the right, and 14 of 18 pulls overall were to the right in this game, as you mentioned earlier, with the 3 counters. They only had 1 pull from right to left, and that was won by McCary. And I'm not even 100% sure that wasn't right to further right, now that I think about it. He go swing outside Brown. I think he went right to left. I think it was right to left.
I think that one I do think I remember, even though I said I don't have the sheet up on me. It just stood out because it was the only one.
Right. There you go. All right. Anyway, Patrick McCary again, and he split the right guard time, of course, with Powers. A lot of people want to see Powers. A lot of people want to see McCary. Since we've seen more of McCary, I think more people want to see more of Powers. But McCary probably played a little bit better and still not good in this game. 45 plays, made 35 of his blocks. 7 missed is a lot for only 45 plays. And there are definitely signs that their arm length continues to be a concern with McCary. It definitely is getting shed, hitting the ground more. And they did some stunting to the inside with Carlos Dunlap, specifically, I think, to take advantage of arm length differential. That was, very apparent, frankly, in what they were doing. They were twisting the outside there. By the way, I don't know if you saw this going to the game. I now am really concerned about having to face Logan Wilson for the next decade here. He looks fantastic. He was the best Cincinnati player on the field the whole day, but crashing on under after under play on those stunts. Obviously, he had his hands on the football and held it once actually, and another time he dropped it. And just really seems to know what he's doing. But to have a inside linebacker who can be the under guy so effectively on stunts is remarkable.
Yeah, one of my draft crushes, Matt Wise, at Matt Wise on Twitter, he was a guy who was also a big fan of Logan Wilson. Not always easy to get your hands on that Wyoming film, but we were able to get a couple of games. And man, just watching him play then, we were like, this guy could really be something in the NFL. And the word kind of got out on him. We certainly weren't the only people, just in terms of draft Twitter. Obviously, the NFL knew about him. But in terms of draft Twitter, there were a bunch of other people that kind of hopped on his bandwagon. Yeah, he played a heck of a game. I'll just comment on McCary real quick. I don't know if it rose to this level, but I know you've done this in some of your articles before. Those 7 missed blocks, does it rise to the level where you're going to indicate the timestamps on them? I know sometimes with certain guys, you said,
"What am I doing it for you?"
Well, I mean,
the answer is the system has to be transparent to be meaningful. So if anyone ever wants to know where I downgraded people, I'll tell you.
Okay,
that's it. You show me also that you're doing the work is my other component of that. Now, I don't really have a concern about that. In fact, I have a concern you do too much work to overanalyze what I've already got. I'd be concerned from your wife's perspective that this would not be a good thing for your health. But in the case of other people, I want to know that you're going to actually use the information I give you to go and respond to it. But a system without transparency is garbage. Yeah. There's two reasons why you can get in somebody's case about their lousy system. One is you take the time to completely understand it from the ground up, and if you do that, then you have the right to criticize their system. Number 2 is if they're non-transparent with you, then you have the right to do it right off the bat. And those questions about transparency, it's legitimate to come up, and no matter what they throw at you, I'm trying to sell it, or I'm doing this, or whatever. I mean, it's usually garbage. So.
Yeah, I only asked because that 7 number, I saw it in the show outline. I was like, that is a lot of missed blocks. So I was like, maybe those might rise to the level of getting specifically called out by a timestamp, because maybe it's not a lot. I mean, you've been doing this for years, so maybe it's not a lot, but it felt like a lot to me.
It happens. I mean, Bozeman also had 7 in this game. He just happened to have 61 snaps and not 45. So, but I've seen over 10 in a game. 10 is a exclamation point kind of a number. When 9 happens, it's certainly noteworthy. And then I really need to break it down and see, is he getting into level 2 and not finding a block? Because that's not that serious. In Bozeman's cases, he had 13 pulls and 3 of them he wasn't able to find a block, and that might be okay. But in actually one of them I know was not that case. So it's losses at the line of scrimmage where he's really getting beat by the opposing defender. Those are the ones that are very serious. And I usually define them in the article, but for this week I'm just going to put all the misses there since you asked.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's service. You can't beat that kind of service, right? Right? You ask and then you shall receive.
You're the man. Okay, let's keep going. By the way, McCary's overall score was a D. He did have 2 pressures allowed, and I gave him a 6th of a quarterback hit in this game. So there's a free runner, and then he and Brown each got a 6th of it because I thought they each deserved about a 3rd for letting the phone booth getting the pocket getting phone booth together. All right, so D for him. Anyway, move on. We've got Orlando Brown. He had 3 missed blocks, which is real good for a right tackle, by the way. That's hard to do. He had 2 pressures, another 6th of a quarterback hit, and half a sack. So his total worked out to be a B- with adjustment. I might have been stingy on the adjustment with him. I don't think Carlos Dunlap really is the player he once was, obviously. But now that I think about how they attacked him, it was a lot of stunt traffic, and that's a lot harder to handle, particularly when a lot of it was Logan Wilson, going right into the midsection, right between right into the wedge between him and McCary, and that obviously is difficult to handle if you don't really have good trust and good technique, good rapport with your partner next to you.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point about Dunlap. I mean, when he was in his prime,
he's a hell player.
Yeah, that guy was a heck of a player, and I'm not saying he's completely washed up at this point, but he's not the same guy that he was. And that's an excellent point about the stunts and about how that could affect Brown Jr. So not only are you working with McCary, who maybe you don't have quite the same rapport with as you did obviously with Marshall Yanda, but now they're switching guys in the middle of the game in different series. So now you've got to adjust, in game. I guess I have a question about that too for you, but we can save that when we get to powers. But yeah, good job. I think by Orlando Brown overall, even against, Dunlap for, whatever he is at this point. And, Sam Hubbard's a good young player. Not obviously on the level that prime Carlos Dunlap was. And then I'll tell you one guy I think that Sam Hubbard does not like to see is Nick Boyle. Because when he's banging down on those down blocks and climbing up to the next level, he will put Sam Hubbard or whoever that DN is really. But Sam Hubbard seems to be on the receiving end of a lot of. He'll just put him into a different zip code. I mean, it's like completely across the formation.
Right. It's that's one of the problems with playing a 4-man front like they do, as opposed to a 5, is as a defensive end, he really gets it, as opposed to being a defensive tackle. And it probably makes it a little bit easier for the Ravens to hit one of the 2 gaps to either side of him, because it's probably a slightly more advantageous block than trying to move that defensive tackle is used to absorbing double teams. Not everyone is good at it, but they're used to doing it more. All right, let's move on here. Everybody wanted to hear about Powers. 16 plays only. I think he had 18 snaps in the game book, but 2 of them didn't count. One of them was probably the kneel down. Another was probably a penalty. But 16 plays. He made 14 blocks, and I thought he looked really good on the blocks he made. But he did allow a pressure, and that was all his. It wasn't anybody else's. And he had 2 penalties. One penalty was an illegal downfield player, which I did not charge him for. And the reason was it was a designed run with Lamar. Ball was in his left hand, runner's stance and whatnot. And then he realized he was caught when he got outside the pocket, and he decided to throw the ball away as an ad lib. And of course, he had blockers downfield at that point. And I mean, honestly, Powers wasn't even the only one. So there was an offsetting penalty that actually overstruck, or whatever the correct word is, the over offset the Powers IDP. It was who was it? Dunlap had some sort of unnecessary roughness foul or personal foul. And so it went away anyway. But normally I would charge him for that penalty, even if it was declined, but I didn't in this case. The offensive hold, I did charge him for. I thought it was kind of ticky-tack by 2020 standards. You too?
Yeah, I did. When you looked at it, especially on the replay, you could break it down in kind of different components, but just like looking at his hands, I mean, he's got his hands inside, right? Mm-hmm. And of course he's grabbing cloth because that's what you do. That's what you're told to do. And the referees will even tell you, if you've got your hands inside and you've got a hold of some cloth, that's not a hold.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it was the, sort of taking him to the ground. Because, Bynes was kind of twisting and moving from side to side, really kind of selling it. I mean, good, bravo for Josh Bynes.
Veteran savvy.
So I had a hard time kind of understanding that one too, but I could see how they could get there on that call, but I didn't really like it.
I think it's the application of torque that they're flagging for, and you're right that I think Bynes did sell it on that play, no doubt about it. But also that Ravens linemen tend to get very good very fast in learning how to not hold when that happens. We've seen terrific results. I mean, Ryan Jensen, 2017, had 3 holds in the first game and none the rest of the season. We had 2 from Stanley in week 1 last year, none the rest of the season. We had, I believe, 2 from Orlando Brown in week 2, none the rest of the season. And, so it's just constantly McCary, his first game was against the Rams. He had 2 in that game, and he might have had 1 more the rest of the season. But he basically got most of his bad play out of the way right away. So I'm not really concerned about Powers. I hope he doesn't lose playing time over what happened here, because I thought he actually looked very good in terms of what the overall quality of his run blocks, which I don't try and make a discrimination for. I want a gross level system that'll basically give me that, but I don't want a 9-point grading system of the individual block, and I just don't want to get into that. So anyway, I thought he played pretty well, but the score does not reflect it after the holding call. He does not get a grade on this game because he only 16 blocks, but his score was only 0.38 per play when you take out those 2 big, the pressure and the holding.
So those events are what brought the score to, and the fact that it was such a small sample size.
Yes,
it's kind of okay. Because I, like you, I mean, just the eye test. I'm obviously not scoring it, but just the eye test, I actually thought he played really well, which is what you said. You said you thought he played well too. One thing that really stood out to me, I guess I noticed it more on pass plays than run plays. I'm not comparing him to Marshall Yanda. Let's just get that out of the way right now in no shape, form, or fashion. But his feet, those short, quick, choppy steps in pass pro, where you're able to maintain as much contact with the ground as possible. Obviously, you're moving, so you're going to lose some contact with the ground briefly. But that sort of lawnmower typewriter action that allows you to kind of stay square and move laterally from to either side to react to what you're getting from. That was impressive because you can watch linemen on the Ravens. You could look at Phillips. You could look at other people. And, the steps are bigger. They're more elongated. They're more deliberate. That was really impressive to me. And I guess, was it the week 17 game last year the Powers played a lot?
Yes.
In Pittsburgh? Yeah. Didn't see that last year. So there's definitely been some improvement in that one specific sort of small, technique kind of thing. But here's a question I really wanted to ask you. I said this to a couple other people, and they really didn't comment on it. So maybe I thought I was making too big of a deal. If I'm Cincinnati, particularly their defensive coordinator, defensive line coach, this is super disrespectful that you are rotating guards in an actual NFL game, a division game. You're treating it like it's a preseason competition.
I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had everything to win in week 17, at least when the game started. The game went on, Tennessee had won their game and they were out of the playoffs. But when the game started, they had a real chance to make the playoffs. And, the Ravens did that same thing to them. They rotated and they, it's not that uncommon. It's just uncommon for the Ravens to be alternating time, but they've done it a little bit over the years anyway. It is what it is. But let's keep moving on. Bredesen was in for one snap as a 6th lineman, made his block this week. So that's that for the offensive line. Let's move on a little bit. Let's talk about Lamar Jackson. I promised you some more specific metrics that will hopefully start the conversation, but 3.07 seconds to throw, which is excellent. That means he's extending the pocket. Those averages are subject to extreme numbers. So if there was a single 8-second play in there, that would have a significant impact even over 30 snaps. Obviously, 8/30ths would, be responsible to each of that. Or maybe 5/30ths. But anyway, you can see how that would increase it pretty substantially. I don't think it was really that. I think he had a lot of 3.5 and 3.75s, but I don't think he had too many that were over 5 seconds. The only one I'm thinking about is the one where he's running around and avoiding the referee. Was a little bit. So anyway, 5.0 completed air yards. He was to 10 last week, which was the best in the NFL or second best. This week, he was the 8th worst in the league in terms of completed air yards. Obviously, that's not what we want to see. It wasn't a matter of throwing all short passes. He was actually right in the middle of the pack, 8.9 intended air yards. It was a matter of not hitting on any really of those deep passes, or not hitting on many of those deep passes.
Yeah, I blamed it on the rain, right? We go back to 2018 and weather was the only thing that seemed to slow him down. No, but seriously, it was interesting to me because I know I said I try to compartmentalize these things and not have them cross games, and I do. But this one thing has been hard for me to really do that with, because it's so counter to what he's shown throughout his short career. You hear the coaches say it all the time, and it shows up on film. He sees the field really well, right, as a passer. And their throws in that game, their throws in the previous games that you would expect him to see and attempt, but he's not seeing them and he's not attempting them. But some of these are deep throws, not all of them,
Right.
but some of these are deep throws, and they're just some of them are slants, right? You can look at.
Okay, let me treat you as a hostile witness now for a moment,
Okay.
and ask you, where are those slants primarily, and to what player? To what player are they?
Probably Miles Boykin.
Okay, and on what side of the field is Miles Boykin normally?
Probably on the left.
Okay, Mr. Crawford, I would like you to answer the questions without a probably.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think the problem may be that he's looking at a substantial wedge of the field, but the Ravens are actually re-gearing their offense this year to try and get him to see the whole field. I don't say like an easy eye puzzle because that's too simplified, but to be able to use his broadest possible vision and then focus down. I thought he was good at this. And last year with an empty backfield, but this year they're trying to have a single back to one side a lot more than they run out of the pistol. Okay, now if you run out of the pistol, presumably you don't have that problem at the snap, but you have the problem after the snap when you have to sell that fake, go into one side, go into the mesh, decide to pull it or not, or even when you have to look to one side, hand fake to the mesh, which is really the significant consideration here, because that was tremendously effective in creating time and space last year. Just those little garbage hand checks froze linebackers, froze edge players. I mean, it did wonderful stuff. And the Ravens have taken that out of their offense this year. And I think they're doing it in the name of having Lamar see the field more broadly from this other, back to one side formation. I really can't come up with another good reason, because I still think Lamar is the best choice to run on the edge. A, I think he's better and faster at making people miss. And B, I think that's where you want Lamar running, because you don't want him running up the middle and taking big hits.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at that. That's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about it that way. I was, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I'm just running it through my mind, thinking about specific plays. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. But I'll go back and take another look at that. It surprised me, and I started to make that comment because, like you, even going back to last year, I thought that he did a pretty good job of, making some of those full field reads. I'm not sure exactly how many times they asked him to do it, but I think when they asked him to do it, he was pretty good at it. And this year, there are just things that I'm seeing that I'm just not used to seeing. And I guess that's why I'm sort of like, man, I wonder, is he really that impacted by the short off season? Is it some of the injuries? I mean, look, another thing that I've thought about, and there's no indication of this because he says he's fine and the team says he's fine. He's not on the injury report, other than the knee, where he missed a couple of practices this week. But I think about the groin injury going back to camp.
Right.
When you see him running on some of those option keeps where he's trying to get the edge, look, I get the stuff about defenses playing them differently, and that shows up on tape. You see safeties flying downhill. You see, sort of defensive scheme and towards the people really flying outside quickly, whether it's a linebacker or a DN, like just even before the ball goes into the mesh, they're going outside to try to prevent him from getting outside. So I get all of that. But, there have been plays, and then these stick out in my mind, these couple of plays. Think back to the Texans game and him being kind of one-on-one with Zach Cunningham. You cannot tell me that Lamar Jackson cannot outrun Zach Cunningham. I will not accept that. I just want to accept that. I know that Cunningham had a couple of good angles on some of those plays, and obviously, Lamar's probably not as fast running laterally as he is, running north and south down the field. I get all of that, but I just feel like I'm not seeing the same kind of acceleration and burst that I saw last year on some of those runs.
The groin injury would be a possibility to look at. I mean, when he's running straight ahead, I'm still seeing the same Lamar in terms of, he's had some runs up the middle that have been not bad for like 8-10 yards, but he also had a 50-yard run, which the longest of his career was right up the middle. It makes sense what you're saying. I think what I come back to is I'm going to put the onus back on Roman. Whatever the situation is with your quarterback, you need to come up with a plan that is a counter move, the appropriate countermeasure to Lamar being put in a position where there's chess piece 1 and chess piece 2 are moving to the right side to defend that edge against him. Mm-hmm. And there's got to be some trick you can do with a receiver, short crossing route, whatever it might be, get the ball out of his hands. The kind of toss play that goes the other direction that they ran to Duvernay. Let's see that again. And see if teams are consistently willing to make this kind of commitment to the edge. But I mean, a late reverse like that, I think could be very effective. It's a high risk, high reward play. Duvernay might get caught for a loss of 8 on the play if it happens improperly, but he could also run for 40. And you got to take those chances. So
Absolutely.
Anyway, all right. So I thought 2 other things about Lamar. One is his completion percentage over expectation was minus 10.4 in this game. That's over 39 dropbacks, 38 passes, 37 passes, 38 passes. I think it was 38. But anyway, he should have had 4 more completions in this game is what that tells me. And it's not just the missed completions. Those were bad, but it's the fact that there were too many interceptable balls. And I think, if you're really an alarmist, you could probably point to about 5 interceptable balls in this game. I think there's certainly at least 3.
Yeah, he certainly put the ball in harm's way more than you're used to seeing. Obviously, we know Logan Wilson came up with 1, could have possibly came up with another. I think the sort of mini Hail Mary to Andrews that Jesse Bates got under, that was another one. I'm blanking on the other 2. But
59. Davis Gaither had a dropped interception.
Yeah, I remember those 4 distinctly. So he certainly kind of put the ball in some spots that you're not really used to seeing him, put the ball in those spots, because obviously he's not had a ton of interceptions in his short career. He really does a good job with that. So that was a little strange to me too. I mean, there's just a lot of things that were kind of strange about this game when you kind of unpacked it, because if you just looked at the end result, let's say you didn't watch this game, you just look at the score, you would assume that they were clicking on all cylinders, right? Everything was working.
Right.
But then if you were to look at some of the numbers, and especially if you were to look at the game, probably more in the second half than the first half, even a little bit of the offense, you would say, well, wait a minute, what's going on? This doesn't look like the guy I'm used to seeing. So could it be the missed practices? Could it be the knee? Could it be, the weather? It could be a number. It could just be that one game. Look, guys are entitled to have off games. It happens.
If you had just watched the defensive side of the ball without sound on your TV, and all you got to do was watch maybe the condensed version or whatever it would be, knowing who the 2020 Ravens are, who I expect them to be, let's put it that way in week 5, because that's, I think, where we are still, I would have thought they'd win that game about 40-0. 2 more touchdowns. Yeah, I mean, they scored once on defense. They had another good short field on defense. They just beat the crap out of Burrow for the entire game. The only thing that would be, the fact that Burrow had given up and was satisfied with an 8-minute field goal drive at the end of the game should have told you enough about how big the score was. So I don't know. I'd have assumed it was a enormous rout from just watching this defense, because the Ravens historically have put teams away like nobody else can put teams away when they put out a defensive effort like that.
Yeah, and some of those opportunities were there. I mean, that throw to Hollywood in the end zone, I only remember it because it was like the ball was on like the top of the eye in Baltimore. Right. And he kind of was sliding to kind of have to try to make that catch. And I don't know if it was just a clean drop or if the cornerback, got a hand in there. It was a little bit of a pass defense. I don't remember. But that was an opportunity. And there were a couple of opportunities there. So it certainly could have gone that way on offense. And I guess people who want to look at the glass half empty of this offense throughout the season, that's what they would point to and say, hey, it just hasn't quite clicked, right? Because hasn't that been kind of the story in many of these games aside from the Cleveland game? Where just hasn't quite clicked. So I mean, that it's fair. I mean, if what Bill Parcells said, right, you are what your record says you are, and they're 4-1. But there certainly are things that you could point to. You say, yeah, but there's more there. There was more there. There's more meat on the bone, right?
Yeah, top team in the entire NFL in terms of DVOA right now. Now they're not at the top in offense. They're 17th or something, but they're still positive.
Mm-hmm.
On defense, they're the best team in the NFL and by a fairly wide margin. And then on special teams, they're astronomically the best team in the NFL. And it's hard to find a lot of problems with this team. You have to look at the offense, which is still pretty good, and really be concerned about other trait-based scouting you're going to do about it, because otherwise there's really nothing to like in terms of points per drive, or nothing not to like.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get back to one point you made earlier about the full field reads, because I think that's at the heart of not making interceptable passes, because you want to have as much eye on the potential other side of the window closing as you do on how much do I have to beat this defender by where I'm leading the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important to have both of those. And Lamar had been so good with that, about finding the empty part of the field. This game is just incredibly unusual and disturbing. But now if I take it for a moment, if I think back to the Flacco era and all the times the Bengals tried the 4-man pass rush, 7-man drops, and they didn't do all that in this game. We'll get to that a little bit later. It was really that created all kinds of problems for Flacco. A lot of his worst games were against Cincinnati under just those circumstances.
Yeah, what was the narrative there? The cover two. He couldn't beat the cover two. He couldn't avoid throwing interceptions against the cover two. So no, it's like so many things, right? This has kind of been running throughout this whole conversation. The more you can put it in perspective, the more it sort of levels you out. And like, well, maybe I really am reading more into sort of a panicky mentality than really is what's there. We'll see. But I don't feel like sky's falling by any stretch of the imagination.
All right. I want to talk some scheme things with you before we get too deep into everything else. I want to still have time for mailbag and players and stuff, but I did want to talk about one scheme thing in particular, is the scripted plays. I'm loving some of it. The Duvernay run, terrific. The pass to Ricard to open the game. So they opened with two plays that obviously Lamar is never gonna have that come up, I don't think, normally in the game. I guess they can always save a scripted play and do it later. But it's they had to practice that with dance steps during the Friday walkthrough in order to have those two plays in the book. And I love throwing that out there. I love showing it to the other team. I love forcing them to defend the rest of the field. And then they didn't really have to defend the rest of the field because the Ravens didn't show that kind of creativity once they got the non-scripted plays.
Yeah, the Duvernay play was just a beautiful call. And I noted that in my run game charting because everything about it, from the formation to the pre-snap motion, looked like a power run concept that they run all the time to the right side of the field. And everybody is flowing that way. I mean, everybody on defense is flowing that way. Obviously, that's how you get a big run like that. The Ricard play is interesting because they've run that at least twice that I remember. Now, not necessarily with Ricard as the guy running to the flat. They ran in the Texans game, and it was Boykin. Excuse me. It was Boyle running to the flat, and I'm thinking Boykin because Lamar actually hit Boykin. He kind of runs a little short curl, sort of right in between the numbers and the hashes, where Boyle is actually going out to the flat. Same concept. And I think they ran it against the Washington football team too. But again, I think he hit that receiver on kind of what I call a little snag route. It's basically a little mini curl. So they've used that and really it looks similar. It's a little bit different. But when you see that play fake and the fullback or the H-back position kind of sneaks out to the flat, and the running back, after taking the play fake, cuts the defensive end. They've been running that going back to morning. I mean, maybe even before.
Vonta Leach.
Yeah. That's in the NFL. I mean, that's a classic. You hear it all the time, right? It's not so. John Gruden, right, would always talk about spider 2 wide banana. they don't run the Y banana part of that play, but the spider part, that's a blocking concept, right? And that's what it is. It's that running back cutting the unblocked defensive end. Now there's some other things that go into what makes it a spider in terms of O-line blocking, but that concept has been around the West Coast forever. So that's a cool play, and they're doing some cool things for Dobbins too. They don't always hit, but obviously you saw the long run off of that kind of QB counter. They've been running that every game too. Sometimes Lamar keeps it. And I could be wrong about this. Somebody can fact check me. But the only other time I can remember them handing the ball to the running back on that play was Ty Montgomery against the Raiders in 2018. Most of the time, Lamar keeps that ball. And it's a unique concept because most people would say, well, that's just quarterback counter. Well, I've heard coaches call that counter bash, right? The B and the A in bash stand for back away. Because if you watch that play, the counter pullers from the left side, they're pulling to the right side. The back is going to the left. He's going away the opposite direction of the pullers, right? So that's what makes it a little bit different than your standard QB counter play. That's the only other time I can remember them actually handing the ball to the running back. And they had a pass play set up to Dobbins. This last point I will make on a corner route where they sent Boykin and Hollywood deep, right? It was kind of a twin set to the left side of the field. And they were basically running clear routes, like all the way down the field. And they kind of motioned Dobbins over to the right there, and he was running a corner route, but the DB there picked him up. So they're looking for ways, to your point, to get some of these young playmakers the ball.
All right. Well, what else do I want to talk about besides scripted plays? The problem, Boykin, they've, not this week, but in past weeks, they had scripted plays to him that worked out. Boykin was just 0 for 2 on targets in this game, as I recall. Snead, Dobbins, Andrews, and Brown seem to get the vast majority of the non-scripted targets. And to me, that's an ongoing problem. I know that nobody thinks that's a new thing, that they're not looking for Boykin, that they're not trying to find Boykin as a receiver. He's too valuable not to have on the field because he's such a good blocker. But boy, I mean, he's not a bad receiver. They need to just get him the football, see what he can do after the catch, earn some trust with Lamar. Maybe they need to do it in a scripted manner and get more Boykin throws in there. Have 5 ready to go. And that's slightly overdoing it. But have 3 ready to go that are all among your scripted plays that you practiced in the 5 Friday walkthrough. You already know exactly how Brown and Andrews run their routes. It's not like they haven't run the same routes all 5 times each, every one of them, since Lamar's been here. You don't need more, practice time with that. You need to figure out how to get Boykin involved in the offense, and you need to be able to call it at any time during the game, not just during the first 15 plays.
And whenever he has these kinds of games, I always like to joke that Lamar is playing somebody in fantasy football and they're starting Boykin. So he's got to find a way to keep that score down. But they have these plays for him. We talked about the slant. That's in there in every game. There's usually some kind of slant flat combination with him and another player. That's in there in every game.
How about a sluggo to go with that? Everybody knows about the slant. Okay, yeah. That's how much trust is that going to build? Throw in a sluggo and let's see what he can really do.
Yeah, well, we saw that one play, right? It wasn't a sluggo, but kind of miscommunication there between him and Lamar. But Lamar thought he was going to go deep, and he kind of broke it off a little bit. I don't know. It's been a weird thing why that connection just hasn't materialized between those two guys. I mean, you can go back to that Miami game, right? And the kind of broken play touchdown where Lamar's fading back, and then he throws it to a spot, and Boykin's there, and you're thinking, man, these guys have something. There's some chemistry there.
Exactly right.
You just haven't seen it.
As an off-script play. And the other one was very scripted, and we've talked about this one a lot of times, that Cleveland touchdown that where it was kind of a late rub, and then he turned for the football was there. I mean, at least from that, even if it's scripted, doesn't he have some trust in the fact that Boykin ran exactly the right route, turned at the right time, caught the ball as he was supposed to? Enough said. We've beaten on this horse. Let's talk about any other skill position players you'd like to hit on in this game, and just name one, make your points. I'll kind of respond, and then name another.
Well, I guess I'll talk about Andrews. I wanted to talk about somebody maybe who was a little less obvious, but I already talked about Duvernay and Dobbins a little bit. No, you know what? No, scratch that. I'll do Mark Ingram. That's what I'll do. I'll do Mark Ingram. Because look, I understand there's this desire to get J.K. Dobbins the ball, right? And even I would say he needs to have more than one carry that he had in this game. Obviously, he had some passing game involvement, but don't forget about Mark Ingram, right? Why are we trying to run this guy to the bench? Because to me, I understand he doesn't have the explosiveness, and J.K. can take one to the house, and that's absolutely important. But I think what you could see in some of those carries, and I guess people could argue that maybe there wasn't enough of them. We've been hearing that too. But whether it was the second quarter or the third quarter, there were a couple sequences in there where it was like 3 runs in a row, right? All to Ingram. Couple powers, couple outside zones. And I think, was it the third quarter where he ripped off like a 14-yarder and then a 20-yarder? Mm-hmm. And you could just see, like, look, this guy, he needs volume, right, to get into a rhythm. He's that kind of guy where he's not the guy who can just come in off the bench. I shouldn't say he's not. I think he's the kind of running back who's better with more volume. And to me, look, Lamar obviously is amazing, but I always looked at Ingram last year as the engine of this offense. He's a tone setter, right? Those runs, he's running through people. He's running over people, and that just grinds on you over time. Now, I admit I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to that. I love that stuff. I'd be perfectly happy if they ran the ball 30, 35 times a game and punt and play defense. I'd absolutely love it. I'd have no problem with it. But I'm rare that way, right? That's an old kind of mindset. That's not the way football is.
Hey, I grew up with the 2000 Ravens, and that was just a fine way to play football.
So I thought he got a little bit of that back in this game, even though the bottom, the finishing, numbers weren't, anything they were going to blow you away. But just that intent to get him the ball, a couple consecutive plays, just give me some more of that, right? That doesn't mean that I have anything against J.K. Dobbins. I've already been accused of that. I don't. I like the guy. But I just don't feel this rush to have him take over the starting job so soon.
I think they say this about good lawyers, and I know they say this about good actuaries as well. You should be able to make an argument for either side, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to make the best possible lead back argument I can, because I hear it. It just sounds silly to me that the Ravens need a lead back. If you're going to play multiple personnel groups, you want to tire the other team out that way, you're kind of committing to a change of personnel by down, mm-hmm. not by series, and the option to get fresh legs on the field, as opposed to running a no huddle where you keep the same 11 on the field, which, by the way, I'd be okay with too, if I thought it really played to Jackson's strengths exactly. Mm-hmm. But I think the personnel groups and the way the Ravens are schemed up to play offensive football, I think they're better off with the multiple personnel groups. But I'll make my case for the single back is this, that last year when Ingram was the single back, and I think to a lesser degree this is also true of Edwards now, is that both of them handle the mesh point very well, and you could run more out of the pistol if it was just the two of them. Dobbins, I know, ran a lot of mesh point type stuff, read option in college. I don't know if they're actually running out of the pistol, and I don't know exactly what his without training camp, familiarity is with Lamar in terms of exactly what he expects in terms of the ball coming out late, early, whatever. But I do know this: when they run the front side mesh, when the mesh is right in front of the quarterback in terms of the handoff, and it might be pulled out and it might not be, that mesh is not lasting as long as what I see in the pistol movement. It creates more time for more things to happen that are generally good for the offense to have that. So I see that as really the question about a lead back or not. If you want more pistol, you could have more. And Ingram was the source of it, or maybe Ingram and Edwards together. I'd be all for that, I think, because I think the general impetus effect on the offense would be greater.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. You don't have to sell me on that. But, look, Dobbins is super talented. Obviously, he's very explosive. We see these big plays that he seems to hit, at least one in every game. So maybe it is just a matter of when and not if. But I don't know. I'm just being sentimental at this point about Ingram. But I just love his running style. He's just a punishing guy. He seeks out contact, and he's looking to wear guys down over the course of the game. And I love that. Him and Edwards, they both sort of fit that same category. I think Mark probably a little shiftier, just in terms of being able to make cuts, and his vision might be a little bit, he's a little quicker to see things sometimes, but they both are kind of similar in that way of just being punishing guys that are just going to wear you down. I don't care what people say. I know there's this whole argument last year with, analytics Twitter, as they call it, that you can't quantify body blows. I don't care whether you can quantify them or not. It's real. Okay, if you've ever played a professional sport, especially if you play not professional, if you've ever played any sport, especially if you played football, even like backyard football, if you're getting hit repeatedly and having to pick yourself up off the ground, it takes a toll. Trust me.
Yeah. There's obviously got to be ways to measure that, and once they get more sophisticated body sensors that they're all wearing, maybe in the name of protecting the players, they could get a lot more information of this type. Dobbins, the last 4 games, 9 carries for 104 yards. That's the reason people want to see J.K. Dobbins.
Can't argue with that.
It's fairly natural to get frustrated. This may be before your time. I think it probably is based on your much lower, more recent date on your driver's license. But in the 1980s, Ricky Irvins would come in to spell Biner at halftime.
Yeah.
And it was a very potent thing, but they'd each play a half. It was kind of a weird situation that they wanted to have. I don't remember, honestly, and probably wasn't sophisticated enough as a fan at the time to know if Washington was really running a lot of no huddle at that point.
I had a family of Washington fans, so I'm very familiar with Ricky Irvins, the posse. They were big time Washington fans back then. I was the one black sheep who was not a Washington fan. So
all right, so you would have been about 9 when they won the Super Bowl in '87, right?
I was born in '75, so
okay,
a little bit older than that, right? 12.
So you're old enough to be watching football.
I remember. Anyway. I remember it well. Mark Rippon.
Yeah.
Doug Williams, even.
Yeah, Doug Williams is the one I'm really thinking of in terms of that being the year. It's actually maybe a year or two before then.
The Timmy Smith game.
That's the Timmy Smith game. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. All right. MVPs for the game. Let's get to that. We'll do the mailbag and then we'll get out of here. MVPs. Want to go 3, 2, 1 with me?
Sure.
Okay. Your number 3 guy. Who is it?
I was just selling this guy, and you made an excellent point about J.K. Dobbins, so now I feel bad about it. I don't know that I can do it anymore. I'm going to stick with Mark Ingram. I'm still going to stick with Mark Ingram. I was going to sway from that, but I'll stick with Mark Ingram.
Okay, Mark Ingram's my number 3 guy also, and I think for a lot of the reasons we just talked about, that he came in the game, and honestly, it was an opportunity for the Ravens to reestablish the run at that point. They didn't do it, but it was an opportunity to do it.
True, very true.
Your number 2 guy.
Oh, let's write him up again. You could probably put 2 and 1 in whatever order you want. I'm going to say Andrews. I'll say my number 1 guy for the number 1 spot. I'll go with Mark Andrews. Quiet for a couple of games, right? And then we see, not now, before the Washington game, obviously he had a couple touchdowns in the Washington game, but the last 2 games, we've seen him kind of reestablish that connection after being quiet in, I guess it was the Texans game and the Kansas City game. And, there's that narrative out there right now that Lamar is force feeding the ball to Andrews and to Hollywood Brown. He's over targeting them. It might not even be a narrative. Maybe I shouldn't even call it that. But I guess when I look around the league and I look at target share, target percentage, whatever you want to call it, among, skill positions, particularly like pass catchers, I don't know that they're that out of whack with other teams. I mean, I guess, the way I thought about it is like, go look at any good passing game and you can go back, right? Whether it was Peyton Manning with Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne or Tom Brady with Wes Welker. I mean, you're going to target certain guys more than other because, these are the guys you trust. And typically they're better and they're open. So, I mean, I don't ever remember anybody saying Peyton Manning was force feeding the ball to Marvin Harrison or Reggie Wayne, or Tom Brady was force feeding the ball to Wes Welker or Randy Moss. These guys were better. They were good players, and they got open more than the other guys. So, look, I'm all for spreading the ball around. I think it makes you harder to defend, obviously. But I don't know that I buy this angle that, he's over-targeting these guys. It's just me.
Yeah, I'm just looking around the league a little bit to look at target shares by players. If I look at Cincinnati, because I think they're a divisional rival, certainly. Tyler Boyd, 40. Mixon 23, Higgins 30, AJ Green 34, totally undeserved targets. Sample 18, Bernard 17, Thomas 11, Azuma 11. He's been hurt for a few games, so he would presumably have more than that. That's a much more balanced set, obviously, with a quarterback who's thrown the ball a lot more in general. But I think I would have to say that the Ravens are fairly peaked in terms of, obviously in this game having 19 targets going to 2 guys. but even for the whole season, that those two guys are getting a substantial portion of the targets. And honestly, when we did target share as a show, before the season, I said, anything that has less than 100 targets for both of those guys is probably wrong. And when you've got 100 going to both those guys, and it's really more like 110 on average, you're already talking about like 44% maybe of all the targets we expect for him to have for the year if there's 500 passes. It wasn't apparent exactly how they were going to go to other players, and it certainly didn't happen so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, one guy was your first round pick at wide receiver, and the other guy is emerging as at least a top 5, maybe a top 3 tight end in the league. Yeah. Who the hell do you want to throw the dots?
Yeah, no, you just
don't get it. I don't get it.
And that's a great point. Is that you're throwing the ball to somebody else only to prove that you can throw the ball to somebody else, and that has value. And it should be part of the game plan because there's players that can do more there. But then we should also just accept the fact that, hey, this offense is still pretty good throwing the ball only to those two guys.
Agreed.
All right, my number 2 guy is Marquise Brown. 10 targets in this game and 7.7 yards per target. He's the only guy who had a decent yards per target number for the game. Just for being the Ravens' only real deep threat, it looks like he's really going to take care of himself this year in terms of avoiding hits, which I really like, much more so even than Lamar does.
Yeah, smart player in that way. Obviously, he knows who he is. He sees himself in the mirror every day. He knows what he's going up against out there. When you can make a play, right? But when you can protect yourself a little bit and you've gotten everything you can get out of it, it's probably a good idea to do that.
Okay. All right. Your number 1 guy was...
He's my number 1. Marquise Brown's number 1.
Andrew's my number 1 guy. Let's get past this.
He got his first touchdown of this year. So, congratulations.
All right. Fantastic. Let's talk mailbag, Josh.
All right. Let's get into the mailbag. Use the hashtag Filmstudy mailbag over on Twitter to get in your questions. Very similar stuff coming in as we did with the defensive podcast, kind of figuring out what this team is. So let's start with Josh's question, who is rather than nitpick, I'm just going to ask you if you have a theory on what the Ravens are looking for offensively and what their vision is for this year.
I mean, I'm really interested to hear Michael's comments on this, but I'll let him formulate them and I'll start the conversation here. Is that I'm not sure they know exactly what they are this year. They're trying this different, less pistol, more running back rotation routine they're doing now. And I don't know what they're trying to do other than scripted plays to try and get the ball to other targets other than Andrews and Brown. They are doing some scripted plays, and they've been generally very successful with those. But as far as like what their offensive identity is going to be, I think it's going to evolve kind of on its own.
Yeah, I think every year, every team, right? I mean, you can look at the Ravens historically and say they're a team that has run the ball and played great defense. And I think those elements are always kind of there, mostly. I mean, you could probably pick a season here or there where maybe it was a little different. I don't think this is going to be too different than that, but each year is unique in that team has to carve out its own identity. And so obviously they're going to run the ball. Obviously they're going to play good defense. You mentioned the sort of work in progress that the running back rotation is. They're trying to work some new pass catchers in. I haven't tracked this, but just the eyeball test feels like I've seen more screens to wide receivers than I've seen in a while. And there hasn't been a ton of them, maybe one a game or two a game.
A couple to Duvernay in particular, right?
Yeah, those kind of really college style kind of bubble screens or quick screens. Makes a lot of sense when you've got guys like that with that kind of speed. And obviously they ran a ton of those. Well, Duvernay did. I don't think Hollywood ran a ton of screens at Oklahoma, but Duvernay ran a ton at Texas. So it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think that they're still trying to figure out how to incorporate these new pieces and sort of these new components, but also having Lamar continue to grow and develop as a quarterback. So it's just an evolution. I don't know that they're doing any kind of major overhaul. It's an evolution of kind of some of their core stuff.
And that kind of goes to Brad's question of, do you guys think this drop back pass heavy game plan this week was because the coaches knew that that's what they needed to work on as a team and using it as a live practice?
I would hate to think that were really true, just because I don't think that's a real productive way to do things. And maybe you want to show other teams that you can pass the ball. That's another matter, but I don't think.
Yeah, but they didn't show.
Yeah, They didn't show they could do it effectively. That's for sure.
Right.
What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, no, I would hope that they wouldn't be treating this as some kind of preseason or kind of practice. That doesn't seem like a kind of John Harbaugh kind of. He's trying to win every game. I don't think he's out there working on stuff. And the pass thing was really interesting at his press conference. He knew you knew he was going to get asked about that. He knew he was going to get it because he came with notes and he was ready to refute, or at least to try to refute some of those things where he said, hey, of those 37 passes, 11 of them were in 2 minutes. Of course, you're going to pass the ball in 2-minute situations. So if you take those out, what do you have? Like 26 passes to, 23 runs, something like that. He's like, that doesn't look that out of balance to me. So he was ready, right? He knew that they were going to come at him for that, because right after the game, he couldn't answer it, right? I think he said something like, I'd have to go back and look at that.
He kicked the can down the road immediately after the game, and he said, we're going to talk about that later. We're going to look at the film, and then I might have something to say about that later in the week.
When you look at the overall numbers, I haven't checked them since this game, but going into the Cincinnati game, I want to say they were 7th in rushing attempts, and they were 31st in pass attempts. So it felt like they were throwing a lot.
That's the Ravens right
there. That's what they do.
Yeah. I mean, 37 to 24 passes to runs, that only seems extreme because that's basically 60% passes. And maybe it's 38, including a sack. So slightly over 60% passes. Go back and look at some game books from the Flacco era, and in particular the late Flacco era, and see if you don't see more extreme numbers than that.
Yeah.
Well, shouldn't the attack have been more on why weren't we running the ball with 3 running backs where the yards per carry is higher than last year, and with a game that Lamar only ran 2 times? That should have been the approach, not why are you passing so much?
Yeah, legitimate question, and I would have been all for more runs in this game. I thought they had some opportunities, particularly when Ingram was running the ball effectively, to stick with the run for longer, and they didn't really do it. But my difference, if they'd have gotten 4 extra runs in this game, I'm going to say no problem at all. It's 34-28 kind of thing. If they got 6 more runs, I'd be absolutely thrilled in terms of the balance that the offense would have had. It's really just because so many of the passes were interceptable, is why we're so pissed off about this pass run rate, I think.
Yeah, and for me, the runs, like you said, the overall number, I'm not that bothered by that. I mean, I guess you could add a few more and I would have been fine with that. But for me, it's more about when they don't call runs. Like, you'll go into some of these drives right after they get the ball back, a defensive stop or something like that, and there's 3 consecutive passes. Can we get one? Can we get one run? And I understand quick, sudden change situation. You want to take a shot, catch the defense off guard. I get all of that. But that's kind of my issue with it, is not the overall number of called runs, but just when you're not calling them is where I might have a little bit of a nit to pick. But other than that, I'm not. This pass heavy thing has bewildered me, because I'm like, look, if you just look at the overall numbers, they're near the bottom. They're in the bottom third of the league in pass attempts. So where's this coming from?
There are reasons why it's better to not take your shots on first down if you're the Ravens. And the starting one is this. If the Ravens gain 3 yards on first down, their series success rate is higher than the rest of the NFL in 2019. Okay, now we're not in 2019 anymore. They're not running the pistol. I get it. It's everything's a little different. But 3 yards on first down for the Ravens offense is hardly a big loss by like a Football Outsiders kind of metric. In fact, their offense was just as good after they gained 3 yards on first down. Great piece out there still on the site, video with Dan Reese. I want to say Dean Pease, going through these various metrics, but it's still out there, and it's on series success rate.
All right, I'm going to combine a couple questions asking about personnel changes from last year to this year. And it's, how much has losing Yanda affected Lamar in the pocket, and how much has losing Hayden Hurst as an extra tight end blocker back there hurt as well?
How about you take one, I take one?
All right, I'm gonna. I'll let you have Yanda. I'll take. I'm gonna respect my elders, and I'm gonna let you. I'm gonna let you have Yanda. Hayden Hurst. It's interesting. I think I saw that question, so I thought about it a little bit before the show. I don't know. This is gonna sound like I'm talking. I'm kicking dirt on the guy after he's out of town. I don't know how great of a blocker Hayden Hurst was. I think it was situational, right? Certainly not a point of attack guy like Nick.
Right.
Either is Mark Andrews. But when you can, sort of get them in those arc releases and get them on safeties, maybe a linebacker, maybe, but more so sort of safeties, contain defenders, guys running the alley. I think they were good at that, right? Kind of on the move, in space kind of blockers. So, have they really lost that ability? I don't know, maybe a little bit. I mean, I think Andrews is probably doing a little bit more of that than he's probably done in the past. Obviously Boyle still does it. Yeah, maybe to that extent, I think there could be something there, but I don't know that it's enough that you can, if you want to make the case that the offense is struggling, if you want to do that, I don't know that that's really the reason that I don't know that's a reason that I would point to try to make that case.
Okay, so I'll take the other side just real quickly, but I agree with your comments entirely about being not that great a blocker at the point of attack, but he was a great level 2, level 3 blocker. Completely agree with basically the way you set that up. And his the three back set that they used a lot with Hurst in the backfield in particular was kind of a secret sauce special potion for the Ravens last year that created a lot of plays, play action releases for tight ends, great runs coming off that. And I thought a lot of that was Hurst blocking level 2, level 3 to make extend some runs terrifically. Well, the other thing I think they really do miss Hurst is Hurst was a pair of hands that Lamar trusted.
Oh, yeah, no question.
And he didn't throw that much to him. I mean, what was it, like 39 times last year or whatever it was? But he threw to him, and that was another guy to get first downs to that he knew he was sure-handed and had, I believe, the highest catch rate of the tight ends.
Best hands on the team, in my opinion. I know we talked about it last year when he was around. I think of any position, not just tight end, even wide receiver. Best hands on the team, in my opinion.
All right, so the other one was Yanda. We'll go real quick here. Right guard's been the weakness for the Ravens so far this year. They didn't fix it with McCary and Powers in this game in terms of how they performed. They obviously didn't get it done in the first several games with Phillips, who had one good game but 3 bad games, or one mediocre, 2 bad. They've got to figure that position out somehow. Hopefully, after the bye, Phillips comes back and he looks at another level. And all of these guys had to go through learning curves, and I think they've got by some of the penalties probably already. We're going to see going forward if they can actually play football.
All right. And then this weekend, 2018-2017, Raven fans got their wish to see Le'Veon Bell line up behind Joe Flacco. And now Bell is released, and there's also talk that the Bengals and A.J. Green are not getting along. Or either of these guys fits in Baltimore?
I'm going to say A.J. Green, no way in hell. I wouldn't want him for nothing. I wouldn't want him at his current contract with no compensation given up to acquire him, which it seems like pretty soon that exactly may be the no. Well, I think the Bengals would trade him for nothing if somebody take his whole contract. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, if he gets, well, I think that story just broke tonight. If he gets the Lev Bell treatment, where they straight up release him, then maybe you take a look at that and see if there's something there. But if there's got to be some kind of trade compensation, look, short of a Kari Vedvik situation, I don't know that I'd be open to that. And I think it's that AJ there. This happens all the time with high profile players or guys who've been high profile players when they get released or they look like there's an opportunity to maybe make a trade for them. We think about them at their best, right? Mm-hmm. We think about them at their peak. And that's the guy that we want. Obviously, if we were getting those guys, yeah, sign me up. Let's go get those guys. Mm-hmm. But we're not getting those guys. It's not who they are at this point in time. And then to Ken's point, compensation is not going to be reflective of that. Probably the compensation is probably going to be a little bit more towards what they were than what they are. And that's problematic.
I think the Bengals will find out very quickly there's no market for him. They don't want him on the team anymore. Josh, you made a real good point. You don't want to have that guy with your rookie quarterback. It's poison.
Well, I think that's what the Bengals are going to get to. Is they want him out of there because they need that guy to be praised and developed and not scared that he's going to constantly be yelled at by this guy.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I don't know how A.J. Green could be unhappy with the number of targets he's gotten so far. He's got 34 targets. He probably deserved none of them. I mean, he's literally had a terrible year of 3.5 yards a target. That is, it's almost out of the Perriman level of production in his last year in Baltimore. It's just, it's off the charts bad. So I don't know what the Bengals think they would get for AJ Green. Yeah, we're exploring. We're taking all offers now for AJ Green. Well, there aren't going to be any offers for AJ Green unless you either eat his entire salary, which the Bengals probably don't want to do, or you basically give him away for nothing and eat maybe 3/4 of his salary.
Is he creating that kind of drama though? Is that like Antonio Brown level stuff? Because that seems really out of character for him.
What did you see, Josh?
There's a video going around the internet now of some lip reading going on where people are saying that he's saying, "Just trade me," yelling at the coaches on the sideline from Sunday.
And that, the last time I saw a guy sitting on the sideline like that on the bench when the rest of the team is playing and not hurt, and there's no evidence that Green was really hurt in this thing. He just got benched. And by the way, some sideline reporter reported soft tissue injury or this or that, but garbage. He put absolutely zero effort into both of those interceptions. It was a disgrace. And, it made all the sense in the world to bench him. And he sat there with that icy stare. It's not like he's trying to ice it up or he's trying to get on the bike and work it out or he's working with a trainer. He's sitting there all alone with an icy stare, staring right into the camera with obviously he's very upset about the situation. A.J. McCarron's in the 2008 playoff game. Go back to it if you have the video. He got benched against the Ravens by the Titans similarly, and he sat there on the sideline, icy stare, unidirectional look to him, and he was far away from all the action in this incredibly close, tight playoff game that the Titans lost on the final drive.
That'd be disappointing if that's the way AJ is playing this. He was for a long time, from the personality standpoint, kind of the anti-diva wide receiver, right? He's a guy that produced but didn't complain for the ball, at least not publicly. Who knows what was going on in the meeting room or the locker room? But I'd be disappointed if that's the way things are going. But hey, things change, right? Nothing stays the same.
No, and this is a year where everyone's at extremes this year, no matter what. So it's all going to come out. The Eagles, Ravens go to Philadelphia this weekend, and the Eagles announced 7,500 fans in the stadium this weekend. Does that make any type of impact?
Probably. Am I really concerned about it? Not really. If you look at the stadium from the game tonight, they had these pockets of people very well separated. I'm sure they make a little bit of noise. It probably sounds better than the background noise, the noise that they make. But, 7,500 is 7,500. Josh, you've probably been to some Oriole games, particularly back before Camden Yards, where the
with 75 people, yes.
Well, with 7,500 anyway. I've been to games with 3,000, way back in the day with the Orioles playing early on. So,
yep. Yeah, no, there's definitely been some ugly Oriole games, but you're right. You do hear it even with the small crowds. All right, that's your questions. You can get them in using the hashtag Filmstudy Mailbag. We've got some more shows coming up this week. Ken, what's coming up?
Well, we're working on an Eagles guest somehow still at this point. So no one else is going to hear this, but if you know someone who's an analyst for the Eagles and you're listening to this on Wednesday morning, we'd love to hear you line up this guest for us because I'm having some trouble getting anyone to commit to it. But we'll have a by the numbers. We'll probably record that tomorrow and release that a day early if you like that content. 12 minutes, very fast paced. We like that. Offensive line article probably coming out Thursday this week.
All right. And go subscribe and check out the Situation Room. It's their own feed. You got to hear it last week. We'll probably sprinkle it in a few more times this year, but go subscribe. We want to help them and want you to subscribe to their feed directly. Michael, how can people follow you on Twitter, and what else are you up to?
Well, before I say that, just to your know your foe sort of request out there, Fran Duffy, if you're listening, if anybody knows Fran Duffy, come on, man, you got to make this happen, right? I mean, there are probably other analysts out there, other people that cover the Eagles, but he's extremely good. So let's make this happen, Fran, or friends of Fran. But for me, mostly on Twitter. At Abukari, Abukari. I mentioned that I started charting Run Game again. I will not be publishing an article or doing any sort of front end display of that work. I'll probably tweet out some things. Who knows if I'll even keep it up all season after my hand has been smacked vigorously by by Ken during the show.
Right.
But that's it. That's pretty much all I'm doing this year. Really was trying to take it easy and kind of trying to take a back seat and just do a little, engagement through Twitter. But there have been so much talk about the run game and what's going on, why isn't it working? I was like, look, I gotta know. I gotta know for myself. I gotta see what's going on. So I couldn't resist, and so catch some of that. Some of that will probably be out on Twitter here and there.
All right. And Twitter's an easier conversation for you to manage, so people should reach out to you there. And all you guys can help out the show by going over onto Apple Podcasts and rating and reviewing the show, sharing the show on social media. We saw someone today shared a audio clip of the show on Twitter. I'm not quite sure how that works, but if you could do that in your podcast app, that's awesome. Share that.
Yeah, it's just it was so cool that he did that. And if anybody, if there's something that really strikes you, we might not be able to pick it out on this side. We think everything we say is kind of clever, but that's obviously not true. But if you can pick out the one thing in the show that actually is, then you're doing us a big favor to pull that out and tweet that.
Yeah. So anything you can do to help us promote that helps us out a lot. Especially since as you have noticed this season, we don't have advertising right now. So we got to keep getting those numbers up so we can attract some advertising in this weird COVID, no one wants to spend money time frame. All right, guys. Well, we will talk soon.